Hi guys! So before the zombies eat our brains, let me share you something about Cerebrum. Crazy Dave is curious about what Cerebrum is. Cerebrum is a set of intelligence. Why? Because it provides us with the ability to read, write, and speak, to make calculation and compose music, to remember the past, plan for the future, and imagine things that have never existed before. It is the largest portion of the brain and the most highly developed part, situated in the anterior and middle cranial fossa. It is consists of an outer cerebral cortex, an internal region of cerebral white matter and gray matter nuclei deep within the white matter. Cerebral cortex. Cortex or rind or bark, although it is 2 to 4 millimeter thick, but it contains billions of neurons. It covers the outer portion of the cerebrum. During embryonic development, when brain size increases rapidly, the gray matter of the cortex enlarges much faster than the deeper white matter. The cortex is gray because nerves in this area lack the insulation that makes most other parts of the brain appear to be white. The cortex also covers the cerebellum. Gyri. It is the folded bulges that create deep furrows, fissures. It is the deepest grooves between the folds. Sulci. The shallower grooves between the folds. Longitudinal fissures separate the cerebrum into left and right cerebral hemisphere. And the corpus callosum is a broad band of white matter containing axon that extended between the hemisphere. It is also the largest fiber bundle in the brain, containing about 300 million fibers. These pictures show how the longitudinal fissure separate the right cerebral hemisphere from the left cerebral hemisphere. Now, let's move on to the lobes of the cerebrum. Each cerebral hemisphere can be further divided into 4 lobes. The lobes are named after the bones that cover them: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. For the frontal lobe, it is involved in reasoning, planning, speech, movement, emotion, and problem solving. So these are the types of things happening in the frontal lobe. In the parietal lobe is the movement, orientation, recognition, and perception. In the occipital lobe is the visual processing. When you get hit at the back of your head, you see star and so on. That has to do with the visual processing. For the temporal lobe is the auditory perception, memory, and speech. You can see that there are a bunch of intellectual functions that are being controlled by the cerebrum. Central sulcus. It separates frontal lobe from parietal lobe. The lateral cerebral sulcus separates frontal lobe from the temporal lobe, while the parietal occipital sulcus, it separates parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. So, here is the major gyrus, the precentral gyrus, which contains primary motor area of cerebral cortex, and the postcentral gyrus contains primary somatosensory area of cerebral cortex. Insula, it is the 5th part of the cerebrum, but it cannot be seen at the surface of the brain because it lies within the lateral cerebral sulcus, deep to the parietal, frontal, and temporal. Next is the cerebral white matter. Cerebral white matter consists primarily of myelinated axon in 3 types. First is the association tract. It contains axon that conduct nerve impulses between the gyri in the same hemisphere. Next would be the commissural tract. Contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from gyri in one hemisphere. Three important groups of commissural tracts are the corpus callosum, anterior commissure, and the posterior commissure. Next would be the projection tracts, contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from cerebrum to the lower parts of the central nervous system. And the example of it is the internal capsule, a thick band of white matter that contains both ascending and descending axon. Next is the basal ganglia. It is the group of structure found deep within the cerebral hemisphere. Recall that ganglion usually means a collection of neuronal cell bodies outside the nervous system. So the globus pallidus, it is the closer to the thalamus, and the putamen is closer to the cerebral cortex. Together, the globus pallidus and the putamen, it is called or referred as lentiform, while the caudate nuclei, which has the large head connected to the smaller tail by a long comma-shaped body, together with the lentiform and the caudate nuclei, are known for the corpus striatum. The basal ganglia help initiate and terminate movement of the body, suppress unwanted movement, and regulate muscle. Now it's time for the limbic system. Encircling the upper part of the brainstem and the corpus callosum is a ring of structures on the inner border of the cerebrum and floor of the diencephalon that constitute the limbic system. The main component of the limbic system are limbic lobe, rim of the cerebral cortex. It includes the cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus, and the hippocampus. Next is the dentate gyrus, lies between the hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyrus. The amygdala is composed of the several groups of neurons located close to the tail of the caudate nucleus. Next, septal nuclei, located within the septal area formed by the regions under the corpus callosum and the paraterminal gyrus. The mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus are two round masses close to the midline near the cerebral peduncles. Next is the two nuclei of the thalamus, which are anterior and medial nucleus. It participates in the limbic circuits, and the olfactory bulb, the flattened bodies of the olfactory pathways that rest on the cribriform plate. Next is the fornix, stria terminalis, stria medullaris, medial forebrain bundle, and the mammillothalamic tract. It is linked by bundles of interconnecting myelinated axon. And limbic system is sometimes called the emotional brain because it plays a primary role in the range of emotion, including pleasure, pain, docility, affection, fear, and anger. It is also involved in olfaction and memory. That's it. Thank you for listening. Now, start planting because zombies are approaching your backyard.